Good morning and welcome to SCORE, Getting Started with QuickBooks Online. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes as we wait for some of our guests to arrive. Thank you. Okay. Good morning and welcome to today's program, Getting Started with QuickBooks Online. This webinar is being presented by Paula Paisley, a SCORE workshop presenter and entrepreneur with more than 25 years of experience helping businesses grow by improving financial control. Paula's business, Paisley Solutions, started in 1996 and operates in Chester and Montgomery counties, both in office and virtually. She and her team partner with small business owners and nonprofit managers to provide reliable and timely bookkeeping solutions. Thank you, Paula, for sharing your experience on this important topic today. And I trust all of our viewers will find it very helpful and informative. My name is Maria Smith, and I'm a volunteer with SCORE, Chester and Delaware counties. SCORE is a nonprofit organization that has been in existence for over 50 years and is a resource partner of the Small Business Administration. SCORE's mission is to foster strong small business communities by providing free mentorship and business education. We are here to support you and to help your business grow. Here in Chester and Delaware counties, we have 100 volunteers ready to help. Our mentoring and most of our educational programs are free. You will find many tools, templates, and other business resources on our website, Resource Library. Okay, Paula, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm going to turn the rights over to you in just a second. In the meantime, this program is 1 hour and a half, scheduled to 11:30. The presentation will be recorded and made available to you, and you'll receive it after today's session. You all have been placed on mute so we can avoid distractions. Please ask your questions in the Q&A box, and we will take breaks to answer them. Welcome, Paula.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming this morning. This is going to be an introduction to QuickBooks Online. I will say for anyone who's using QuickBooks Desktop, while the processes are the same, the software is vastly different. All right, folks, so we're going to get started this morning with basically how do I set up a company? And let me tell you a little bit about what we're looking at here this morning. This is a sample company that QuickBooks provides. They call it a test drive. And so this is not an actual company. And it does have some limitations because it's designed by QuickBooks. And so we have to work with what they give us here. But we will do our best and it will get us through. And also note that this is something that you have access to if you want to get in and play around with the QuickBooks Online. When you receive the follow-up information from SCORE, it will include a resource page with some information, and it will have a link to this test drive company so that you can go in and try it out if you like. The great thing about this is you can put in transactions, you can change things, you can do whatever you want. Just know that once you close it, it does not save. So if you were to open it back up again, anything you created would not be there. All right, so moving forward, setting up your company. This is called the home page, and this little gear icon up here in the right corner, we're going to start there, and we're going to go to accounts and settings. So once you subscribe to your QuickBooks and get access to it, you would want to go to the accounts and settings and enter your relevant information. I believe when you purchase the software, if you haven't purchased it yet, that it will probably give you a template, not a template, yeah, a template or a wizard type thing, that when you get started, it will ask you a lot of questions. So a lot of this information may get entered. As you're getting started, if you want to skip over some of that, and put it in later, you could do that because you can always come back here and edit things. So what we're looking at is the company information. You see the little pencil icon over here. If you click on that, we could edit the company information and save it. Oops, sorry, got myself all the way out of there. So you can always come back and add or change things to this information. The usage tab tells you how many users you have, how many chart of accounts. There are limitations based on the level of the software that you purchase. The sales tab, this is information about customizing the QuickBooks for the way you're going to use it. And we're not going to go through every individual thing because it would take us a week to do this presentation. So if you are going to be invoicing customers from your QuickBooks, you may want to come here and set up different information about your sales forms, your products and services. Are you going to do late fees? And all of these other things that are available to you. Now, I will say, although we're not going to go through each of these individually, I will say that the help in QuickBooks is pretty good. So it's up here in the right-hand corner, and it's always, if you're a first-time user, it's always a good idea just to go to the help and make sure you understand what you're setting up before you move forward. Expenses, basically the same thing. You're going to customize how QuickBooks works for you when you're entering accounts payable bills or expenses from credit cards or cash expenses that you might have had. If you're going to use purchase orders, do you want a message on your purchase order? And again, you see the little edit button over here. Time, it is possible to track time in QuickBooks. And this is where you would manipulate that. The Advanced tab, this is where you would set up what your fiscal year is for your particular organization, what your accounting method is, accrual or cash. If you're not familiar with that, basically the short version is if your cash basis for tax purposes, your tax return will include anything that you have actually, any monies you have actually received from customers and any monies you've actually paid out. And that does include if you paid it with a credit card. If you're accrual based, your tax return is going to include any invoices that you've sent to customers, even if they're not paid, and any bills or expenses that you've entered, even if you've not paid them yet. So that's something you would need to talk to your accountant more if you need to understand that, or Google it for a little bit more information. It's not exactly that simple, but that's the short version. The method you set here typically, when you run reports, they will show up how it's set up here as accrual or cash, excuse me, but you can actually, within the report, you can always alter that. Now, I like to tell folks that you could spend an entire lifetime entering data and information into QuickBooks. There are a lot of features and functions that most of us will likely never use. There are asks for information that may not be necessary. So if you're not sure you need it, skip it. If it's necessary for QuickBooks to operate, it will tell you that you can't skip it. So for instance, you may not want to enter your tax form or may not know at the time. You can always come back and put it in there, but for most of us, it's not really that important. Do you want to use account numbers for your accounts? Well, that's up to you and your accountant. Most of us, it's easier just to give accounts a title like revenue or product sales or bank service charges or office supply expense, rather than tagging it with numbers that most of us aren't going to remember anyway. Tracking classes, we'll talk about that a little bit later, and locations. And again, here's a lot of features that you can look at and decide if you need to do anything there. So this is really a preference customization for using QuickBooks. All right. We're going to close this. And we're back to the home screen. Now we're going to go back to the gear icon, and you'll notice there are a number of menu items here to choose from for what you may be wanting to do. Most of these are not transactional. They're more functional and structural for the QuickBooks. Manage users. We're going to talk about that next. If you have multiple people accessing your QuickBooks and entering data, I highly recommend setting up users, especially if you have other folks entering data into your QuickBooks or able to make changes in your QuickBooks, because if you give them an individual user and login, there will be an audit trail. And if something happens or changes or is incorrect, you can go to that audit trail, track it down, and see who exactly did what. So I highly recommend setting up users and passwords and not sharing those passwords just for security purposes. You can also set up accounting firms. I believe in most versions of the software you can set up 2. So most folks usually set up their accountant and their bookkeeper if they're using an outsourced bookkeeper, or if you're using some sort of consultant, you may want to set them up. But users are typically individuals in your organization that are going to be using the software. Okay. We're going to go back to the gear icon. And you'll see, since this is an introductory QuickBooks tutorial, that we are going to be using this gear icon quite a bit here, because we're getting the QuickBooks set up to use the way we want to use it. Your chart of accounts. These are your categories in QuickBooks. I believe when you set it up, it will ask you a type of business, and you can select a type of business and it will pre-fill a chart of accounts for you. I suggest doing that because there are some basic accounts that should be in your chart of accounts. And if you're not really familiar with accounting, you may not know what those are. So it would pre-fill these for you. And if you use them, great. If you don't use them, you can always make them inactive. And you can always edit your accounts. You can add new accounts as needed. So to add new account, you would come to the chart of accounts here, and over here you would just click on the new. You could import them from an Excel file, but that's a little bit complicated. So let's just say we want to add a new account. We're going to click on new, and we're going to determine what type of account it is. And let's just say we have another bank account that we want to use. Maybe it's a payroll account, and we're going to save it under bank accounts. And you can skip this tax form section, I believe. I'll see if I can skip it if it lets me. But account name, let's say we have a payroll checking account. And I like to put, especially when I have multiple accounts, I like to put the last 4 digits of my account number in there, just so you can add a description if you want. You'll see down here what it's going to look like. You can save it. Oh, okay, it's going to require the tax form section, so we're going to do that and save it again. Now we have a new payroll account. Okay, and you can do that with any accounts that you need to add. A lot of companies like to detail their revenue types so they can track different revenue types. You can see that Craig is very detailed here. He has many different income or revenue types, landscaping services, where he has materials for different things. He has labor for different things, other services that he does, pest control. You may not need to be that detailed, or you may want to be that detailed. And that's entirely up to you and your business. This is going to, the chart of accounts is going to direct what comes out on your financial statements and what they look like. So anything that are assets, liabilities, or equity are going to show up on your balance sheet. And anything that is income or expenses, it's going to show up on your profit and loss report. Now, I do suggest folks who don't have any accounting knowledge, it's always good to maybe buy a bookkeeping for dummies or go online. I do caution you that if you're using YouTube, it's not always right. Folks aren't always right. That doesn't always match what your business needs to do. So just a little caution there. But certainly it's always pays to learn a little bit about the theory and behind the software there, how things work, how things show up on your financial statements, just so you understand when you're setting things up and when you're reading financial statements, what it means. Let's see. So we're going to scroll down just a little bit more back to the income. And you'll see that, again, Craig is very detailed. He has a lot of accounts. Most companies don't need that many accounts. But if you want to track a certain piece of information, then that's how you would likely track it, is by giving it its own account. So you can see how much you spent on job materials for decks and patios, if that's important to you. If it's not, just a simple materials account may work for you if you're a landscaper or a contractor. So the chart of accounts really needs to match what you want to see on your financial statements and the information that you need to run your business, because there are two reasons to track all this accounting information. One is so that your accountant can do your taxes accurately. And the second, and I think most important, is so that you have information to make good business decisions and that you know where your business is financially. So, it's a good idea to do a little thinking, maybe designing first before you start with the QuickBooks, and say, what information am I going to want on a regular basis to make my business decisions? Any questions so far? Okay, I don't see anything, so we are going to move on. So one of the really great things with the QuickBooks Online is how easily you can link it up with your bank accounts and your credit card accounts and loan accounts, depending on your bank. If you're using some small startup bank, it doesn't always work well, but if you're using any of the larger banks or a bank that's been around for a while, likely they link very well with QuickBooks. And what this does is it pulls information into your QuickBooks that you can either match to things that you've already entered, or you can enter the transaction as it comes through what we call a bank feed. So we're going to go over here, and I will caution you, this is whatever version QuickBooks decides to give us in this test drive. I know sometimes when I work with clients that my accountant's version has a little bit different menu over here in the black on the side, on the left side. So your version may look slightly different. That's nothing to worry about. It's just may has something to do with whatever version you've purchased. So what we're looking for is the bank feed. And if you go to banking, and again, banking, you will see that Craig has 3 accounts set up linked to his QuickBooks. And to do this, it's very easy. You just go over here to link account. It will ask you for your online access, login, and password information. It may send you an email or a text with a code from your bank to allow it to connect. But once you get these linked, it basically pulls in the information automatically from your bank or credit card accounts, and some folks link their loan accounts. So we're going to be looking at Craig's checking account. We're going to scroll down a little bit here, and you can see that transactions are coming in from the bank. Now, you have to be very careful. If you have already entered a transaction for this particular item, you're going to want to match it. And down here we see one that says match. And that means I've already entered that deposit. So I highly recommend that you click on it, and then a little window opens below it, and it gives you a little bit further information, and just say, oh yes, that makes sense. And the reason is, especially if you're a type of business that has transactions that tend to be similar or the same amounts all the time. For instance, maybe you sell a particular service that's always $1,200. You may have 3 or 4 deposits for $1,200, and you want to pick the one that's the right date. So there might be more than one that shows up here as a possible match. And you need to be careful with the dates, because if you're matching a bank fee transaction from August to a deposit that you dated in October, it's going to mess with your financial statements. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and say match. You can say it here, or you can go back to here and say match that transaction. Okay.
Oh, it's Maria. We do have a question in the box when you get a chance about matching accounts with your QuickBooks banking accounts.
All right, I'll get that in just one second.
Okay.
Okay, so then there are other transactions that QuickBooks is looking, and it says, I don't see anything that likely matches to this. So I'm going to put this little action of add here. And you do not want to just willy-nilly go through and add. You need to open the transaction, and you need to determine if you want to put a vendor in there, because you see it's coming up as A1 rental, but you have a vendor schedule that you can go and check and see what transactions have happened for that vendor. If you don't set it up here, it doesn't show. And apparently Craig has not set this vendor up, so I'm going to say add this vendor. And it's not a customer, it's a vendor, and I'm going to say save it. Next time it will be there for me to pick. You see it's now in my vendor list. Now you need to categorize the transaction. QuickBooks doesn't know what to do with it, so it's putting it here. And this is money that is coming in. You see it's in the received column. So it's actually probably a refund on rental expenses. I'm going to see if I can find that. And equipment rental, so that's probably what it is. So we're going to put it in the right category. And you can see down here, bank detail. If you looked at your bank statement, that's what you would see on the bank statement. So I'm going to add it. All right. And you can see all of a sudden now QuickBooks says, oh, now I know what to do with A1 rental. I put it in equipment rental. And if that's correct, you see there's still no payee. So I don't want to add it. You can if you don't want to set up your vendors, but I recommend setting up the vendors. I find my vendor, my account is right, I add it. Okay, so the difficulty here is, or the challenge here is, don't add something that you've already entered or you're going to have duplicate transactions. And that's, QuickBooks doesn't always necessarily find the match. And one reason for that, let's just give you an example. Suppose you entered it as this deposit as 868.17 and the bank, it went into the bank as 868.15. It's likely not going to find that as a match. So in your mind, you have to say, I know I entered that transaction. What's going on here? And you want to go look for that and see why is that wrong? Because if you just willy-nilly match or add this, if QuickBooks didn't find it, it would give you an ad over here. So if you added this, now you have two transactions in your bank account and it's going to adjust your balance and you're likely going to be wrong and you don't want to be overdrawn. Okay, let's see if I can get to these questions. My bank didn't link to QuickBooks using MS Edge. Should I try Chrome? That's certainly a possibility, is to try another browser. If that doesn't work, you might need to check with the technical section at your bank. So you might have to call the bank and say, hey, I need to talk to someone about linking to my QuickBooks Online and see what happens there. Shouldn't the A1 refund be income, not expense? Well, since a rental, we also had expenses here, I assumed it was a refund of some sort. So it's not income, it's a refund of an expense. So I put it to the expense. Okay, another nice thing about the bank feeds would be setting up rules. If you have transactions, and this will give you a tutorial on that, we're going to skip right to the rules. And Craig's does not have any rules set up, so we're going to do a new rule. And we're going to call this A1 rental. And this is money that I generally spend. So it's money out, it's not generally money in. And it's going to apply to any bank account. Okay, and it's going to apply to the credit card account. So anytime QuickBooks sees A1 rental as money going out from any of my accounts, and what's the description? What am I going to see on the bank? What's the bank going to see? A1, we're going to put that in there. The more simplistic you are, the more transactions it will capture, because sometimes companies, for instance, Staples, it may come in as Staples store number 1236. Another time it may come in as Staples store 457. If you want them to capture all the Staples, you need to limit it to Staples in the description. If you put it specific, it's only going to pick up that specific Staples when it comes through on the bank feed. Okay, where do I want this transaction to always go? It's an expense, and it's going to be rental, equipment rental. The payee is always going to be A1. And do I want it to automatically add, or do I want to see it? Do I want it to just populate the information for me and I want to see it? My preference is not to auto add, because sometimes you might look at something and say, oh, I already entered that transaction. If you auto add it, then all of a sudden you've got duplicates. But if you're someone who enters most of your items through your bank feeds or your credit card feeds, You can do auto ads so that every time it sees Sunoco, it just goes right to gas and you don't have to fool with it. So you save the rule. And it's telling you that every time the bank sees a 1, this is what it's going to, QuickBooks is going to do with it. Okay. All right. So you can enter transactions from your bank feeds or your credit card feeds. A lot of folks do that. Just know that if you've written a check and you did not enter it in QuickBooks, it's not going to come into your QuickBooks until it comes through the bank and clears the bank. So you don't want to be overdrawn. So you have to be a little bit careful there, that if you keep a low balance in your account, you want to make sure you're capturing those transactions in your QuickBooks before they hit the bank account. So again, it's personal choice, but just know that if something hasn't hit the bank feed yet, QuickBooks doesn't know about it. You look at your bank balance and see, I have $10,000, but oh, I wrote a $9,000 check yesterday and QuickBooks hasn't recognized that. And you forget, all of a sudden you think you have money and you don't have money.
Paula, a quick question in the box. How often does QuickBooks update from the bank?
Typically it updates, I think it updates daily, but there are some banks that require you to get a PIN. So I have one client that I work with that every time I go into the bank feed, it tells me there's an error and or tells me to verify information. I have to click on it. I have to get a code from the bank and then it will update. So it's going to depend on your bank.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to move on to recording the deposit. We're going to talk about just entering basic transactions in QuickBooks. So the first one would be recording a simple deposit. All right. Okay, so over here in the black menu bar here, you see new. You're going to click on that and you're going to say, I want to enter a bank deposit. Okay. Now, there are so many ways money comes into our accounts these days. It may come in from an ACH from a customer if you have that feature or function. It may come in from a credit card batch deposit. It may be a deposit that you did, a mobile deposit. It may be a deposit you actually took to the bank. So you need to understand where the money is coming from and how it's going to end up in your QuickBooks. But let's just say I'm a simple little, well, I shouldn't say simple little. Let's say I'm a little gift shop and I do not do any mobile deposit or ACH. I do not invoice customers. I take money into my register. My register is not linked to QuickBooks. At the end of the day, I figure out my cash that I need to deposit. And so I make a deposit and I take it to the bank and I'm going to put it in my checking account. So on October 13th, I'm going to put money into my bank account. So I go to the bank deposit. You'll see here's a 0 because I haven't told it I'm depositing anything yet. I have some payments that came in, but we're going to skip those for now because that's not what I'm depositing. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to add funds to this deposit and I'm going to call it yeah, I have to work with whatever accounts Craig has here. Who did I get the money from? And if you're a store like that, you're probably not going to enter all of your customers and enter every payment in here that you received during the day. You're probably just going to set up one customer and call it, let's call it daily sales. So I'm setting up a customer that I'm calling daily sales so that I can use this every day. And this is going to be, this would be my daily revenue, but I have to choose one of Craig's accounts. So I'm going to call it other income. So if you're putting in daily sales, it would be whatever revenue account you've started. And my deposit for today was $5,000. And you'll notice up here, now I have $5,000. That's the amount of my deposit. If I also had something else to deposit, like an insurance refund, I could add it down here. State Farm, insurance expense, $100 refund, if it went on the same deposit. I tell folks, always good that whatever's on a deposit ticket is what you put on your bank deposit in QuickBooks. Don't separate them, because when you go to do your bank reconciliation, you want to see $5,100 and not $5,000 and a 100, because if you have a lot of those, it gets very confusing doing your bank reconciliation. So you want your deposit total to match what's on the deposit slip. And that was very simple. We've added that deposit. Now, when you see that come through the bank feed, you'll just match it to the one that you've entered. Now, perhaps you're Craig's Landscape Design and you invoice your customers and you receive payments. So if we had a couple of payments from our customers. If I go to receive a payment, and I'm going to choose a customer, and they paid me with a check, and it was for this particular invoice, so I'm going to select that one. So if you're receiving payment from a customer, we're going to assume it's attached to, it's because you invoice that customer. There are other ways, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but for right now, we're going to receive payment on this invoice. Okay, I'm going to, that was my only one I received. I do want to call your attention to up here, deposit to undeposited funds. If this is the only thing that's going to be on your daily deposit, you can select your bank account and say deposit to checking, because that's the only thing on my deposit slip today. If there were multiple payments, you would want to enter all your payments and put them all to undeposited funds. It basically puts it in a little bucket, and then you would go to your bank deposit feature, and they would show up here as multiple payments. And you would say, okay, I got these two payments. I'm going to enter it to my checking account. I'm going to pick them both. And now my deposit is going to be both of these items, and I'm going to save and close. So those two payments were already entered by Craig. I didn't have to enter it because it was already there, but in your case, you would enter all the payments you received from customers against the invoice. One mistake that folks who are starting out sometimes make is they invoice customers out of QuickBooks, and then when they get the deposit, they just go to the deposit screen and enter the customer and the amount. They never link it as a payment to the invoice, and then all of a sudden they've got all these unpaid invoices, and they've got the money in the bank, but it's not linked together. So just be careful that if you're creating invoices in QuickBooks, you need to link the payment to the invoice. If there is a way to do sales receipts. Let's just say your shop and you don't use a cash register, so you're using just your QuickBooks. Someone comes in and buys something, and you don't want to create an invoice for that particular customer. You can do a sales receipt, which basically, okay, do I have that option here for Craig? Here we go, sales receipt. A sales receipt basically links the purchase, which is the invoice, and the payment together. So if you're getting paid right away, you might want to do a sales receipt. And I'm getting paid right away. I'm going to put it in undeposited funds because I might have more today. I'm going to pick my product or service, and I'm getting paid $1,000. And I'm going to save and close it. So if you don't need to actually give your client an invoice, or if you're getting paid right away, you can do a sales receipt. And we will just go back and talk about the invoice. So if you are invoicing customers, you just click on your invoice, and you'll notice these screens look very much the same. Okay, so this looks very much like our sales receipt, except we don't have the box for, is it going to undeposited funds or is it going to my bank account? You don't have that box because if you're doing an invoice, you're expecting that you're going to get paid later. Or you could always do the invoice and then just receive the payment right after it. So your call. And it's basically the same. You're going to select your customer. You're going to put in your product or service. Anytime you do a sales receipt or an invoice, you have to have a product or service. We'll touch on setting those up in a minute. So it populated because I had an automatic rate in there. Maybe he got 2. So I'm going to save and close. Now, this invoice, since I did an invoice, not a sales receipt, when the payment comes in, I have to apply the payment. It's going to sit in my accounts receivable, which we could run an accounts receivable report, and I'll show you that a little later, but it's going to sit there until it gets paid. Questions on invoicing, sales receipts, or making the deposits?
No questions right now.
Okay. All right, so that's money coming in. We also have monies going out in different ways. So let's say I wrote a check and I want to put it into QuickBooks, or you can purchase QuickBooks compatible checks from a printer or from QuickBooks, and print them directly out of the QuickBooks as you set up the check. But either way, I need to enter that check. So I'm going to go to the new plus sign over there and enter a check. And it's going to pick up my next check number. And you want to make sure that that is the correct check number. You see the box down here. If it was not, I would change it. Who am I paying? I'm going to pay Books by Bessie. Do you want to pre-fill this check? What QuickBooks is saying is you've paid Books by Betsy before. Do you want me to use the same account information? I'm going to say yes. If it's not right, I can change it. So Books by Betsy apparently is a bookkeeper. It's going to legal and professional fees bookkeeper. And the last time it was $55, but this time, let's say it's $105. So I have to be careful that I change my amount. If there's a description you want to add, you can put it in there, like 4 hours or a date, whatever you'd like to put in there. And we will save this. I just want to caution you that the descriptions also pre-fill. So if you use the pre-fill option, you want to make sure your description is still the correct description before you save it.
In the meantime, we do have a question in the box.
Would you invoice if you're entering pledges more than 5 years? I'm not sure what the more than 5 years pertains to, but you could use the invoice feature for entering pledges, because if it's a pledge, you haven't received it yet. And then when it's received, you would record the payment.
Thank you.
Okay, so we also have oftentimes bills that come in and we're not going to pay them right away. We're going to wait until later. So we have an accounts payable function in QuickBooks where it tracks who you owe when you enter the transactions. So a little distinction here, QuickBooks calls when you are charging a customer, they call that an invoice. When you're paying an expense, they call that a bill. So it's good to get familiar with the distinction. It's easy to say, oh, I'm going to bill my customer. Well, to QuickBooks, you're going to invoice your customer. You're going to get a bill from a vendor. Just don't want you picking the wrong feature because the transaction would be incorrect. All right, so we're going to say Cal Telephone sent us a bill, the bill number, and you would change the date. Let's say it was on the 3rd. If it's due on the 3rd, or if it's due in 15 days, whatever information you need here, the bill number, and then what category is this going to? Again, QuickBooks is saying last time you put it to telephone, I'm going to assume you're putting it to telephone, and I'm going to say, okay, that's correct. So I'm going to leave it, or I'm going to change it. Last time it was $56.50, maybe this time it's $58. And I'm going to save it. You'll notice down here in the bottom right, I have save and schedule payment. We're not going to go through how that works because we're not actually linked to a payment function, but QuickBooks does have the ability for you to pay without sending a check, a paper check yourself. It uses Melio, and you can set up with your vendors to send them ACH deposits in 3 days, or they can choose to get a paper check, which Melio would then issue for you. So you can use that feature if you like. Right now, they're not charging for it. At some point, I expect they'll charge for it, but it is out there. We're not going to go through it today. But I'm not going to save and schedule payment because I'm not using that function. I'm just going to click save and close my bill, and I'm going to pay the bill later. So it's tomorrow, and I'm going to go in and pay my bill. I'm going to click on new. I'm going to go to pay bills, and you see I have several bills here that need to be paid. Here's my Cal Telephone bill. It's not due yet, but I'm going to pay Diego's Road Warrior. So I'm going to click on that. Actually, up here, you want to make sure, where are you paying this from? Are you paying it with a credit card? No, I'm going to pay it from my checking account. My next check number is 73. That's correct. The date is going to be the 13th. That's correct. I'm going to pay Diego's. Okay. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to save and close, in which case it's going to record the check that I wrote, or if I'm going to print the check out of QuickBooks, I'm going to save and print. So that's accounts payable. I entered a bill, I paid it later. So that's up to you. If you want to throw all your bills in a folder and then just enter the check as you write it, that's certainly your option on how you want to run your bookkeeping system. We did see that when we did pay bills, we have the option of choosing the credit card account. So perhaps I'm going to pay Norton Lumber using my MasterCard. And again, I could also pay Robertson's at the same time. And this would assume that you're giving Norton Lumber and Robertson your credit card information. QuickBooks is not going to go out and say, oh, here, Norton Lumber, use my credit card to pay your bill. That's not what's happening here. It's just you called them, said, put this on my credit card. You have the bill in the computer. You're saying, I paid that with my credit card, either online or I called them or went to the store. And I paid those, so I want to enter those transactions in QuickBooks. Okay. Questions about paying a bill or writing a check?
No questions right now, Paula.
Okay. We're moving along pretty good here today. So you also will have a situation, you may have a situation if you're using credit cards that you use your credit card at the gas station, then you go over to Starbucks and you get a cup of coffee with your credit card, and you need to enter those transactions in QuickBooks. Now, a lot of folks with the credit card transactions, they'll link the credit card and they'll enter the transactions as they come in through the bank feed. It saves them a lot of time. But if you're someone who wants to enter your receipts as you get them, you can do that manually by going to the New button. And to QuickBooks, a credit card expense is just an expense. So you would click on expense. And you would say, who did you pay? And let's say it was Chin's Gas is where you got gas. You paid it with the MasterCard. And you have to be careful if you have multiple accounts that you're always picking the right account. Otherwise, when your balances will become incorrect, and when you go to reconcile, things will be in the wrong place. It's easy to fix, but you really don't want that happening on a consistent basis. So when did I get gas? Well, I got it yesterday. And I used my MasterCard, and there was no bill or invoice number. It was for fuel, that's correct. It was not $52 this time, it was $85 because gas has gone up so much. And I'm going to save and close that. So it records that expense in your credit card register, so that when you go to reconcile, it's already there. You may have noticed we also had credit card credit. Oftentimes you get a refund on your credit card. You would click the credit and put this transaction in, whatever it was. Let's say, somebody else here. Let's say Computers by Jenny. We overpaid them and when we bought a new computer, and they're going to give us the money back. So it's going to be I'm just going to put it in office expense. And we're going to type here it was a refund for computer. So again, that credit is going to show up in your credit card register when you go to reconcile.
One question in the box here, Paula, is there a way to print more than one check at a time?
Yes, you can send them to a queue, and then you can go and print the checks. And let's see, I don't do that very often, so let me see if I can show you that. Okay, you see this little box down here that says print later? So you could set up 3 checks or however many checks and say print later, and then you save and close it. And then you would go to the print queue. Here it is, print checks. And you would select what type of check you're using. And again, if you're ordering checks to print out of QuickBooks, they have to be compatible. So we're going to use a voucher check that has a stub for you to keep and a stub to go for the vendor. And you can preview the check. We're not going to go into it, but there are ways to manipulate where it comes out on the check the first time you print it because it may be off center. And say, yes, I'm finished with setup. And you would put your starting check number in. And whatever checks you had set up, you could pick if you wanted to print them all or just a couple, and then preview and print. Okay, any questions on anything we have gone through so far? I know it's very quick, but there's a lot to get through in our hour and a half. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to reconciling an account. Excuse me one second. So I highly recommend that you reconcile your bank and credit card accounts monthly. Otherwise, sometimes things happen and they don't get entered, and if you don't reconcile, it gets missed, and then next thing you know, you're overdrawn, or you can't remember, oh, I wrote that check, but who was it to? I don't know. And then you have to go to the bank and look it up or have them look it up. So the other thing reconciling does is helps you make sure that you have 99.9% of all your transactions in QuickBooks. You don't miss things. It will also show you if you have duplicates. Oh, look, I entered that deposit twice. Okay, you need to go back and delete that. I was talking with a customer who is new to QuickBooks Online a few days ago, and she was having trouble getting her check printed. So when she was finished, she didn't understand that the ones that had printed incorrectly had to be voided. And all of a sudden she had 3 checks in this QuickBooks bank account for the same thing. So just know if you saved a transaction and it's wrong, you can go back and fix it, or you can go and void it or delete it if it's incorrect. So how do we reconcile an account? Again, we're going to go up to our gear icon. It's under Tools. So this is the reconciliation screen. Basically, you're going to go select the account. Let's say we're going to select the checking because I set up that payroll account. There's nothing in there. It's going to give you the beginning balance from the previous reconciliation. That would be the ending balance on the previous reconciliation. If something happens after you reconciled last month, like you deleted something that was reconciled, it's going to give you a little message up here. It's going to say, oops, something's not right. Your beginning balance is not the same as what you reconciled to last month. So then you have to follow the prompts and figure out what it was and correct it. So you always want to check your beginning balance first, just to be sure. Hey, is this on my bank statement? Is that what my beginning balance is? Okay, it is. Good. I can move forward. You put in your ending balance. It's very important that you put in the right ending date for your statement. Most banks end on the end of the month, but not all. So we're going to say October 31st, and we're going to start reconciling. Okay. Dates are critical in QuickBooks. It's always be sure when you're entering a transaction that you're checking your date. Always double check your date. If you enter a check and you accidentally date it 2023, it's not going to show up in your bank register. Well, it's going to show up in your bank register on QuickBooks as 2023. But if you run your financial statement, it's not going to show up in your profit and loss report as an expense until 2023. So very careful with dates. So what happens is once we put in our ending balance, we're going to come here. It gives you all these little messages, which annoy me. So I tell them to go away. No, I don't want your little messages. So if you're using bank feeds, what happens is QuickBooks knows it cleared the bank, so it's going to come in with a cleared date here. This is a sample company, so yeah, we do have some that say, okay, this came in from the bank feed because, oh, I went to the bank feed and I matched it or I added it. So QuickBooks knows it cleared. Otherwise, QuickBooks doesn't know it cleared. So, point I should have made earlier, stay up to date on your bank feeds and your credit card feeds, getting everything added and matched. If you leave something sitting in there, it's not, unless you entered it, it's not in the QuickBooks. So you want to keep that cleaned out, and then that way when you get to your bank reconciliation, it's pretty much done for you. Oftentimes, if you've done your bank feed correctly, your difference is zero and everything's already cleared for you. When you come in here and it's a piece of cake, you just say, yep, that's right, save it. So in this case, we have transactions that have not been cleared yet. So I have to go in and say, okay, this is October. Do I have any October transactions? Yeah, I do. So apparently a couple of older transactions cleared, and then these cleared, and it's going to keep giving you a difference here until you get to zero. I recommend that you try to reconcile to zero. If you're at $150 difference and you're like, I don't care, and you say, go ahead and reconcile, it's going to make a transaction in your QuickBooks for that $150 that doesn't really exist. Well, it exists because something happened in your bank that you didn't pick up in your QuickBooks correctly. But it's just going to plug it into an account called reconciliation discrepancies. So it's, I highly recommend that you stay up on your bank feeds, you stay up on your reconciliations, and correct things when they're wrong. If you leave transactions sitting in the bank or the credit card account that actually never cleared, your financials are wrong, because if it's in QuickBooks, it's included in your financials. So let's just say, here's a deposit for $175 that never cleared. One, I would say, why didn't it clear? And I would go back and look and see if I had entered a duplicate deposit, in which case I may need to void this one. If I had entered the invoice, this is accounts receivable. If I had entered the invoice and the deposit, now I have my revenue doubled in there, one of which is not correct. So you need to clean up anything that shows up wrong, things that don't clear. You need to track them down and clean them up.
Paula, it's Maria. We have one question in the box that might be related to this. Is there an easy way to look up an invoice by number under a specific vendor to see if it was paid or entered yet?
Yes, I'll come back to that.
Okay.
So once we get to 0 here, we're going to say finish it. If we're not done, we can save it for later. And if we're totally screwed up and we want to start over, we can close without saving. If I need to go back and change the statement ending balance because I entered it incorrectly, I can click edit information and go back and say, oh, that was 2 cents. Okay, save. And now it becomes 65.8102. Another nice feature I like, if you have a lot of transactions on your bank account and you've got an error, one good way to try to narrow that down is look at your bank statement. Oftentimes it'll tell you, what were my total deposits? Oh, that matches. Okay, my deposits are right. What were my total disbursements? Oh, that's wrong. That's where my issue is. So let me look at just the payments. I can go to the payments. I click on this little button and it will filter out all the deposits. They're still there. You're just not looking at them. And you can go back through and say, oh, oops, I missed this. I missed clearing this one check. Okay. So that's always helpful. And then I can go back and say, oh, if I want to go back. You can also, if you want to clear everything that's here, maybe you're not using bank feeds, but you know everything cleared, you can just click this little dot and say, yes, I want to select everything. And you'll see I'm still off $92.50 since this is all baloney information that we've fed QuickBooks. That's just a coincidence that I'm that close. But anyway, you want to get down to 0. So once you're at 0, you're going to click on finish now. I'm just going to say close without saving. And that's how you reconcile your bank or your credit card accounts. You have an opportunity here to print the reports, or if you want to print it and save it with your bank statement in paper, or you can save it as a PDF. You can go to the history. They will stay in here when you reconcile. Apparently, Craig doesn't reconcile, so I don't have any, but normally they would be listed by month here, and I could open it up to see if I needed to find a difference because something changed from last month, or if I just needed to give the bank reconciliation to my accountant, I could click on it and print it. My preference is I save them as PDFs, but they do retain here in QuickBooks. I just caution you, if you ever stop using QuickBooks, if you didn't save your transaction receipts and your invoices and your bank reconciliations, if you don't have PDFs or paper copies, once you quit using QuickBooks, you no longer have that history or that information. You can also, from this screen, you can say, okay, let me check this account. I want to look at the savings. And again, Craig hasn't reconciled, so there's nothing there. All right, I will come back to the first question. Yes, you can ask your accountant to help you set up your QuickBooks. I don't know that your accountant has experience with QuickBooks. That would be, a question to ask. Do they know how to use QuickBooks? Most accountants do, but I can't say for sure. I'm going to come back to the other question. So I want to get one more thing in here before you take any other questions. It's all of this information we're feeding into QuickBooks. It's important that we be able to look at our reports, make sure they seem correct, be able to give reports to our bank if they need it, or if we're applying for a loan or a credit card, we might need reports, or we need to give it to the accountant if they don't have access to their QuickBooks. Occasionally these days, I still run across an old school accountant who doesn't use QuickBooks and they just want reports. So the two most important reports for a business or an organization is the balance sheet. Again, I highly recommend you get some training on bookkeeping or accounting if you don't have any experience with it to understand these reports. The balance sheet will show your assets, which is anything you own. It will show your liabilities, which is anything you owe. And it will show your equity, which is the difference between what you own and what you owe. And you will notice if you looked at your chart of accounts, as you set up these types of accounts, wherever you set the account up as a type, if you set it up as an inventory, as an other current asset and an inventory account, it's going to show up on your balance sheet. Your revenue and your expenses show up on your profit and loss report. Here's income, comes down, gives me total income. Cost of goods sold is an expense, and then it goes down to other expenses, and it comes to the bottom and it gives me, did I make money this particular period or did I not? Note in your reports, sorry, I don't know how to turn that off. In your reports, you can set the date. So if you want to look at a particular period, if I just wanted to see last month, what did I do last month? I can click it. Make sure you click run report and that it actually changes the date at the top here. You can see what's in here for September. I can change it to the last quarter. I can also switch it to cash base. Remember, accrual means any invoices I've done that are not paid by customers, they're still included in the accrual-based reports. Any bills that I've entered for vendors I have not paid are included in the accrual-based reports. If I switch it to cash and click run report, it's going to exclude anything that's unpaid, whether it's an invoice from a customer or a bill from a vendor. It's going to exclude those. It's only going to include anything that has been paid. And then, of course, you can customize your reports. There's a lot of different options to customize a report. You can memorize the customization if you want to set up a report a certain way. You can have it display different columns. You can have it include the prior year or the prior month. You can add a percent of income, all different ways to format these reports. I do encourage folks to look at the reports on a monthly basis and make sure that it makes sense. I caution you, if you're seeing negative amounts on your reports, you have to look at that. There is a rare occasion, there's a couple of accounts that do end up as negative amounts on your reports. For instance, accumulated depreciation, accumulated amortization on your balance sheet, they would be negative on your balance sheet, but for the most part, most accounts should have a positive balance. If they don't, you've either set up the account type wrong, or maybe you've entered something incorrectly. All right, I'll take a few questions here. All right. Is there an easy way to look up an invoice number? Oh, hang on, I've got one about the report. Can you compare to the prior period? Yes, you certainly can. Click there, run the report, and it comes up with, since I ran it for the quarter, this is the current quarter, this is the prior quarter. Yes, QuickBooks is subscription-based. There are different levels of subscription. You would just go to Intuit or QuickBooks Online. There is a desktop product as well. That is also now subscription-based. A lot of folks like me who have started with the desktop before there was QuickBooks Online, we still think the QuickBooks Desktop has more functionality, but Online has the nice feature of being accessible over the internet easily. So just make sure if you're purchasing QuickBooks that you're being careful and understanding what you're purchasing. And you can always upgrade your subscription. Once you've upgraded, I don't know, sometimes it's difficult to downgrade the subscription. Okay, is there an easy way to look up an invoice number under a specific vendor to see if it was paid or entered? Yes, there absolutely is. Over here on the expenses tab, you have vendors. You have a similar tab under the sales for your customers. So go back to expenses, vendors. We can look up Books by Bessie. We can see the transactions for Books by Bessie. We can click into the transaction, drill down to the actual transaction, and see what the transaction was for. This was a check, so obviously that was paid. Here's a bill. And when we pull it up, we can see that it was paid. We can click on the payment. We can go all the way back to the transaction if we need to. It was paid on August 15th for that particular bill. Now, just caution you when you're doing the bank feeds or entering transactions, if you don't enter a customer or you don't enter a vendor in the field, it will not populate in these registers for your vendor or your customers. Okay, 9 minutes early. Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, I appreciate your attending the QuickBooks Online seminar.
There's a new question in the box.
Okay, how do you use this for a tax return? I believe you can link it to a tax return software and Intuit tax return software. You do need to set up the tax lines when you set up your chart of accounts. The subscription fee is a tax write-off. It is a legitimate business expense.
Okay.
All right, and I'm sure SCORE will send you out some follow-up information, and it will include the resource page that gives you the link to this test drive software if you want to give it a try.
Okay, I see one more question in the box, and I think I can answer this for SCORE. It's, can you receive a certificate for work continuing education credit here? To the best of my knowledge, the SCORE programs don't necessarily apply continuing education credit, but your receipt would be your confirmation from SCORE that you attended this workshop, and also the information that you received from it after today's program. Maybe you can present that to whoever would want to see that on your behalf. Thanks for that question, Lisa. Okay, if Paul, if you're finished sharing everything about QuickBooks, we can switch to the score slides, and we'll continue to check the question box as we go along in case there are any other questions that pop into folks' heads. Okay, I'm going to bring back up the program here, and I also wanted to just share that if you have any questions that might come to mind after the program, you can always email the contact you have at SCORE for this, and one of us can certainly make sure we get your questions answered following the program. There was a lot to think about here, right? So Paula, thank you. Wow, you gave us so much information and really excellent practical examples, real live examples of how to use this tool. I find it amazing how easy it is to do all of this online and to keep all those records in one place. As you mentioned earlier, everyone will receive the recorded webinar after today's session, and a handout that Paula has presented will come along with that, including links to some of the SCORE resources. So, remember that SCORE is here to help you with your business and any of the next steps on this topic or other topics that may come up. Please reach out to your SCORE mentor for support. You aren't alone in this process of working on your business. If you aren't already working with a SCORE mentor, you can request one by going to our website. Use the link here that you see on the screen, and you will get that link also in your follow-up email today. You can either go online and sign up directly with a mentor, or you can call the office and speak with Catherine Weissenberger, our office administrator, and be matched with a SCORE mentor. We are doing face-to-face meetings if clients are interested in doing that. We also do video, phone, and online sessions, whatever is most convenient for you. So before we all leave today's session, we do have a quick poll. Let me check the question box first. I think we're good here. I think we answered our questions. Okay. Before we leave, we have a quick poll to get your feedback on today's session. This helps us to improve future programs and to understand more about what you would be interested in. I'm going to launch it and just ask you to take a couple of minutes to give us your responses. We really appreciate your attendance today. We know you're busy people with very little time, and it was great to have you take the time with Paula today to learn about QuickBooks.
Thank you all for coming. I need to sign off. Have a great day.
Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Maria.
And for those of you who might be interested in other topics that SCORE presents, just go to our website and click on the tab that says Take a Workshop, and you'll see all the programs that are scheduled for October, November, December. There's quite a few programs still coming. And for those of you who may be women-owned businesses, we've got a big event with Westchester University next Friday. That is on the list of workshops. It's an all-morning event in person at the Westchester Foundation. The details are included in the invitation online. We hope to see you there. It's a really premium program we've been doing for 14 years with the university. Okay, I'm going to close this poll out now and just say thank you very much once again. And if again, like we said, if you have questions outside of today's topic, don't hesitate to contact us and to check out our website. It's a wrap. I hope you have a very nice day.